no one is born into change management or change leadership.
I love how you started with no one is born to change management.
It's kind of something that's a non-linear, at least from my experience, it's non-linear. You kind of find your way into it. I think far too often, some of the pitfalls for change and change leadership and change management has been, let's figure out the project success measures. Let's figure out what does the project want to achieve. And I would say that's the wrong way to look at it.
Welcome to Change Leadership Conversations, where we dive into what it takes to lead change in today's disruptive and fast-paced world. I'm Yvonne Ruke Akpoveta, the founder of the Change Leadership. We create change leadership workshops, content, courses, and community. My guest is Jeff Fraser, a global change executive whose career spans financial services, energy, and professional services. Jeff has led major global change efforts with budgets of up to $5 billion and projects spanning digital adoption, regulatory compliance, and building operational excellence. Welcome, Jeff. Great to have you joining us today. I'm excited. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Yvonne. Thank you for having me. It's a great opportunity. I've been following you from afar, and congratulations on all your success on change leadership.
Oh, thank you. It's interesting too, when we talk about knowing each other. I know we connected through the Change Leadership Conference. And when I say connected, you were part of the community. And then a friend says to me, oh, don't you know Jeff? You've met Jeff before. We were together. We had a barbecue. I said, really? And then I go search through my emails and I see we've connected, we've exchanged emails, and I didn't realize that. So really great to have you on the podcast and have you joining me in this conversation. Welcome. Jeff, when I look at your background, I look at all of the things you've done. Your change leadership and your change management experience spans financial services, energy, professional services. You've done digital adoption, regulatory compliance, operational excellence, all of that. You've even had change budgets up to $5 billion. Tell us about your career trajectory and your path. Where did you start out and how has that brought you to where you are today?
Yeah, first I want to say no one is born into change management or change leadership. It's kind of something that's a non-linear, at least from my experience, it's non-linear. You kind of find your way into it. So going back, I started off in automotive, which actually brought me to Toronto, and I was a sales leader within Chrysler Canada, or Daimler Chrysler at the time. And there was a pending market downturn that was about to happen. It always happens in automotive first. And there was an opportunity for me to connect through networking Deloitte's human capital practice. And an area that didn't even really exist, it was Salesforce effectiveness. Because of the market downturn that was actually coming to consulting early because of how consulting is impacted by discretionary spends of organizations, they pared back the area I was going into. And I quickly had to learn organizational design and change management on a number of critical transformations that were happening at the time of that downturn. So I stayed for a number of years with Deloitte, did some local Toronto projects within financial services, some global programs for Deloitte itself and how they were transforming themselves across the Americas. And I think that my last client engagement with them was a Suncor Petro-Canada engagement in which they had just merged, and I was helping consolidate and integrate their SAP systems, which was, I think, one of the largest ones at the time that we had done. I had then about to start a family, which is great. They're much older now, but at the time, there was an opportunity. I always had this entrepreneurial bug, and I said, there's a chance I could jump at this if there's the right opportunity. And sure enough, I finished off with the Suncor work. The Deloitte wanted me to move during the week across the country, and I just didn't want to leave the family, but they were super supportive. So I moved on to my own entrepreneurial venture with a colleague friend of mine, and that's really what started a 10-year journey of my own consulting firm called Ingenuity Advisory. And that was wonderful. Suncor was gracious enough to take me back. It means I did some pretty good work, I hope, for them. And I ran a portfolio for about 3.5, 4 years for them. And that took me all around North America to different things like I had never been to, refineries and head offices that they had in Calgary and other places. And so after that, and did really good, diverse work within Suncor, then there was a bit of a downturn in the oil and gas market, as it happens, because it's cyclical. And then I found my way back downtown Toronto into financial services. And I launched what we call a robo-advisor, the first one amongst the Canadian banks. We did it in actually 6 months as a really amazing team of cross-functional team members from across the bank. That was the first foray into an internal fintech being launched. That was an exciting program that got me into the digital transformation space a bit more. And then I did some portfolio work for BMO under their wealth management group. And again, basically was working with the head of wealth management globally and the distributed leaders of their teams. And I also then started working on North American projects for BMO, whether it was regulatory or other digital type projects. Then an opportunity came up at TD to do their third-party risk management program, new policy procedures, and then they were starting an e-procurement tool, so help them kickstart that process. And then BMO called me back. And that was really like my largest project at that point. So BMO Capital Markets called, knocking the door, and there was a substantially large budget for this workplace transformation that was happening in Toronto, New York, London, and Ireland. And I got to lead the change on all of that. It was a substantial project. It was really fun. And then jumped over back to TD just as COVID was roughly happening. And I did another substantially large engagement by bringing in a new facilities vendor across North America. And if you know anything about these large organizations, people is a massive cost, but so is real estate and their assets. And so that was a massive vendor agreement in which we aligned it across North America. And it brought in not just new facilities management, but new technologies, new ways of capturing data across the organization. And that actually during COVID, that led me into my executive position. And so I had the opportunity of leading a change management group, small and mighty when I started, a few contractors and a few amazing full-time individuals. And then we grew it to almost about 100 people.
Wow.
It was literally, I think, one of the largest change management groups, certainly at TD at the time and across banking. And we grew into a very distributed change management group in which we supported all aspects of our U.S. business. So I became an executive for a U.S. organization across their consumer, commercial, shared services, and regulatory bodies. And that's what I've been doing for 4 years.
I love how you started with no one is born to change management. And that's what it is for so many careers. When we were doing university or we were doing school, there wasn't any course like change management. And we've been doing what we've been doing for over 20 years, right? Now you can go to university and see a course called change management, but that wasn't something we had many years back. And you would have to be very intentional about your own personal and professional growth and development to be able to go into change management. One of the things that you spoke about, and when we look at the work you've been doing, is leading global transformation, leading enterprise-wide change. We know it's not simple. And add on top of that, you're doing global transformation. What would you say has been, or you found to be the biggest challenge when trying to align multiple functions across an organization, multiple business units, and leaders to have that shared leadership vision, because you're dealing with many micro cultures, right? Yeah. So what's been that challenge for you with leading enterprise-wide and global transformation?
Yeah, I'll pull back on experience here and I'll get to the answer. A lot of your audience may be some blend of independent contractors of change, change leaders, change practitioners. I think it's really easy when you have one project in an organization that you've been brought in for and being asked to change the mindset of the leaders, of the people, because they're focused on something that's probably deemed very critical. In our case, we had like 255 distinct change management engagements or work streams, et cetera, that were deemed priority. Like there were things we would say no to. And the challenge is when you have that many priorities, and there's just that many in a large organization, how do you get a leader who's already short on mind share because there's so much change happening in their world to listen and engage and deem that they play a larger role than just their role? And I think the one other challenge is when you have so many leaders that are playing a part in this, you almost have to explain, here's what change management is. Sometimes you don't, some leaders absolutely know what it is. And then there are leaders that don't. And then there are leaders that say that they do, but they don't, and they have their own interpretation. So the question would be how do you create a unified contract across an organization so you can standardize how you want to enact change? Yeah. And that is extremely, extremely difficult. And I'm not saying it can be done perfectly. What you try to do is you try to carve out a niche with a number of leaders, build successes and build upon those successes so that other leaders can see what you've done in really seminal projects, and then try to build that as a use case for future success with those groups, right? Because organizations inherently morph, change, and transform on the regular. There's restructurings that happen, there's reorgs, leadership changes, and every time that happens, it creates either new leadership that doesn't understand how change leadership works. But I think that's the best way, is build on wins. And try to find ways that you can get leaders in specific forums together where they can understand the path of the unified group. It doesn't always happen, and often it doesn't, right? Those are best case scenarios, but the successes I've had in the past have led me to building momentum with leaders that are net new to the space.
I like some of the things you've said, and I find it very funny, not funny, but very real, where you say, there's some people who understand change management when you come in. There's some people who own up to not understanding change management. And there's some people who say they understand change management, but they absolutely don't understand change management. So I think back to where I went into this engagement and they said, oh, yes, I have change management experience. I've done this. I know everything about it. And then guess the question they ask? Why do you need to engage with the people? Why do you need to speak to people on the project?
This is the analogy I've used in the past with my teams, with my clients, is that they have an interpretation. Sometimes, and this will resonate with the audience, like, I see you more as a communicator, or I see you as a process design person. Sometimes that change leadership, change management bucket is that drawer in your kitchen where you just throw everything into, but you don't know exactly what goes, like where you don't know where something goes and you put it in that drawer. Right? That's where you have to be very specific up front of what you're intentionally what you're trying to do. And if you don't, you're going to get caught with either scope creep, or you're going to get some version of a leader that says, well, I thought that you told me you were doing this, but in my mind, it was this. And that's where it gets to be really difficult. And sometimes you have to have multiple kicks at the can with leaders. It's not one time where they say, yes, I get it, right? It's working with them over time.
Yeah, I like you say, you may have that training or that discussion with leaders, and organizations change, new leaders come in, old leaders go. So give me some practical examples of how you have done that contract, of where people understand what change management means, or how you've supported your teams in the past to help them help their sponsors or help their projects understand what change management means. Or even when we think about shared language, because I believe shared language is very, very key when it comes to change management, because like you said, people could have that drawer where they just dumping everything into saying this is what change management means. How do you create that shared understanding and knowledge of what change management means so that everybody is rowing in the same direction?
I think you need to have a vernacular, a common language that the business can understand, not that change people can understand. I think far too often change people talk, change leaders, change practitioners talk in a way that they understand, but the business does not. And I think the language of business is through partnership. What are you trying to accomplish, right? And I think far too often, some of the pitfalls for change and change leadership and change management has been, let's figure out the project success measures. Let's figure out, what does the project want to achieve? And I would say that's the wrong way to look at it. What is the business strategy? What does the business want to achieve? What are those key outcomes for their long-term strategy that this project ties into? And how do we help them deliver that? And I think one of the other ways that we've done it in the past is you build teams within the business to some degree. Like, you may centralize your change team, your change leadership, but you're distributing those teams so that they have distinct accountability and knowledge of those businesses, so they're forward deployed. When that happens, the business then doesn't have to come back at you and say, I don't think that they understand us. No, they do, because now they're part of your whole delivery process. And again, that's assuming that change is part of a delivery cycle within a large organization. But when they are, then you've got accountabilities, you've got cadences built within the organization where your change people are speaking at the same table as other delivery and business people, and they're collectively trying to solve these problem statements for the organization. And then collectively, they're engaged on these critical and priority projects, right? That gets you buy-in, is to build up that momentum so that you're closer to the table. I've always said, you're not entitled enough to get to the table. You have to earn your way to every table. And you're not going to get there from day one, because you've been assigned as a change leader or a practitioner on a project does not mean you're going to get to the table right away, right? You've got to find ways to get to it on every single one. No matter if you're doing 200 projects or one, you've got to earn your way. And I think being humble and finding that language to those leaders, those sponsors that get you there is going to help. And maybe you have to do it leader by leader, but essentially what you're eventually trying to do, at least in my case, is build an operating model that is more consistent across an organization.
Yeah. Two things you said that I absolutely love is finding the right language to speak with them. It's the basic 101 with change management when it says the what is in it for me, because they all have their strategic goals that they're heading towards. So when you're speaking to the leader on the project, it's really about what strategic goals align with them. And if they see you as supporting those goals and your project and your change will help support those goals, they're more bought into that, right?
Yeah.
And I also like how you say sometimes it's a one-on-one journey. When we say one-on-one journey, because what's important for one leader may be different for a different leader. Yeah. What's important for this leader may be different for the sponsor. And what's important for the sponsor may be different for another business unit. So having that realization that you're working with multiple stakeholder groups and you may have to tailor your approach every now and then is so critical, right?
It is, but it's also tying those conversations to the broader organizational value and vision. And I don't know that junior practitioners are going to understand that right away, but I think through learning, your senior change leaders are going to tie that in to say there's a common alignment that has to happen here, right? Because you easily can think in your business silos of how we operate, and that's great, but that one enterprise approach still needs to be factored in. And that's the great thing about change leaders is that they can see across, right? They're typically diagonal thinkers. They can think about what are the impacts and the ramifications of the things that they're trying to do as it relates to other parts of the business, right? And so I think those things are critical to bring in to any conversation up front is, okay, I hear what you're saying, but have you thought about this? Have you thought about how this cascades across?
What comes to mind, whether you're a junior change practitioner or a senior, should really know, again, it's part of being a change leader. It's about stakeholder, right?
Yeah.
I would say stakeholder impact or stakeholder analysis, which is something that everybody should have the basic foundation to do. And if you're really doing a proper stakeholder impact analysis, you're going outside of your team, you're going outside of your area to understand what are the potential multiple touch points. If I look back in my career over the last 20 years, I've been doing change management. My impact assessment, I always want to know what are the projects that are happening? What's the organizational priorities? Because that helps where to position your change in the grand scheme of things. So whether you're junior or not junior, isn't that the mindset we should start to lead with?
100%. But I think as you scale through a change organization, your ability to see depth and breadth expands. So I think a junior practitioner, and don't get me wrong, at every level of a change organization, not everyone is built the same. There are really proficient junior resources that think in the way that they're already playing at a senior level or getting to that point. I think it's actually more about the conversations that happen with senior leaders, though framing the change around how do we do this in a way that's bigger and the ramifications are known. Like, yes, change impact assessments do capture that, but some people don't know how far to take the change impact assessment or to ask those questions. And forgive me when I say this, I'm less of an academic change leader than I am an execution-driven change leader. I really believe in, and when I said this about speaking the language of the business, there is no other language the business sees. There is none, right?
None.
And so if you're not speaking their language, you're not probably at the table, or nor do they want you there. So
they don't.
They do not.
They don't, because if you're not speaking the language, and the amount of times I have seen that be an issue where people outside another project would say, what, all these terminologies, I'm not understanding what you're doing. And they just feel you're creating more work for them when you're bringing all these big terminologies. And instead of helping them with the work where they already feel overwhelmed. So one of the things I've trained people to do when I'm doing the impact assessment, like you said, it's not about the traditional ways or academic ways of doing it. I'll just simply go. My first question to them is, I just want to understand what's happening in your business. And that is what an impact assessment is. Understand what's happening with them in their business area and how they're doing it. And it's not that big, mighty, data-driven solution.
Well, I think you've seen so many business cases that come out the door that even before you talk about impact assessments or, change stories or anything like that, sometimes the business doesn't actually know what they want to change. Sometimes business cases are done ahead of funding cycles to get it into the door so that you get the funding before it goes into the next fiscal or the next quarter, right? So sometimes they're pushed through. And when they're pushed through, are they really intentionally thoughtful about what are they trying to achieve? You often have to ask those questions as a change leader to find out, is this really what you're trying to drive at? Is it is it fundamentally your goal to do this? And if I understand that, we're in agreement with that, then I can work with that. You have to ask those probing questions about what are they aimed at doing? And sometimes it's asking counter questions to test to see whether they're actually there or not, right?
Yes, it's a whole skill set. And that's why it's a journey to get there. So we've been talking about rolling out these changes enterprise-wide and what it means for people and how to get those buy-ins. One of the challenges that change managers or practitioners or professionals will talk about around change management as a function in organizations is to demonstrate value. When those uncertain times come, when those restructuring times come, and I've heard of organizations where they would get rid of completely the whole change management team, right? How do leaders, we're speaking to people who may be executives here, who may be leading CMOs, change management offices, how do you demonstrate the value of change management? How do you measure the success in quantifiable terms that people can say, yes, we need change management, and it's not just the cost, but there's a return on investment in having change management within the organization?
There's metrics that play into like your own change management organization when you're scaled, like the one that I was driving. I would say, first of all, when the business is bought into your own change organizations, like when you're capturing costs from the business that they're invested in, you find like you've got deeper engagement, right? So I think there are some organizations where they're small enough where you've got to carve out a budget for that. But meanwhile, larger organizations, I think, have the luxury of having billable models. Now, they're supposed to be zero cost models. And in TD's case, we were a profit center because we were leveraging contractors and different levels of our organization at different bill rates. And I think that helps, right? Because the one aspect of that is now the business can see value in how you're approaching aligning resources to the change that's not going to be a burden to their financial balance sheet. When I think about the world is changing also and how we're looking at change from a data standpoint, right? I think organizations want to be able to see scale now. They want to see how do we measure not just one change? How do we measure the totality of changes in one particular area or potentially across the bank? And I think that's becoming more and more of, it's always been the holy grail, but I think it's actually getting closer and closer. We were doing that as a prototype at TD, and I think we're seeing really good early results. But I think being able to say, okay, here's where all of the changes are now impacting a specific stakeholder group from all of these changes, right? And that gives you saturation points that helps you draw out the cadence of their investments to make sure that you've got the right dates of when you want to launch something because your people may be too overburdened or the business is overspending in a specific period of time. That's helpful. When you talk about the specific change and how do you drive value, there's really interesting things. You have your normal change measures that the industry uses, right? You've got after training, you're checking how many people went to training and the rudimentary stuff, right? But then you can get with your market leaders or something like that within your business to say, at the front lines of our business, are we seeing behavioral changes that are changing based on the feedback that we're getting from the business on, we were doing it before this way, and now we've seen more and more people adopting this new process, right? And you're getting feedback from leaders, not just the people themselves. And I think there's interesting ways of capturing data, right? But all that data feeds up and the business is hungry for data. Any way that they can use it, manipulate it. And that's been, I think, the fail point of change for a long time. You can create individual project dashboards, but you're not building change at scale. And that's going to be something that has to be thought through. Now, if you're an individual practitioner as an audience member today, that's not something you have to focus on. But thinking about how you can drive data from that project that links up to potentially other change projects or a way of even starting for that organization, a way of thinking around how they can measure change in a more standardized way, that adds value. That's an important trigger for them because they're all looking to figure out, okay, how do we get return on investment for our change? I see it from a number of different lenses. Traditional change metrics that get used by various organizations and practitioners. For myself, I used utilization rates to make sure that my teams were deployed against priority projects, that we had a good billable rates and a mix of junior and senior staffers to make sure that the budgets were down. I made sure that we had dashboards that were created through my directors that were across each business on how change was being adopted at a business by business level, and then standardizing as best as we could. And that's what we were moving to. But there's lots of ways I think that you can drive value. But certainly it's also being another voice in the delivery cycle and the business solution cycle that helps them frame how are we dealing with all of this. That's a key thing. It's not just how you're dealing with a change by change. How are we dealing with this large problem that we have in our consumer bank or our commercial bank, right? Or any business unit that you have in any organization. Those are key things I think you should think about.
Let's take this very simplistic, very basic. You spoke about data drives. How do you quantify some of those things you've mentioned? One of the things you've mentioned has the behavior change within a certain team. Are they doing the processes any better? How do you start to capture that information, turn it into quantifiable data that people can look at and say, this is cents and dollars to justify why we need to continue to pay for this change management resource or pay for this change management team or hire more people? How do we turn that data into dollars and cents that make it feel very quantifiable? Because when the financial folks are looking at everything, that's what they're looking for, the dollars and cents, right?
They are.
They forget the very tangible benefits of culture and mindset and skills to be able to deliver.
Well, I want to first say this to the audience, that culture and behavior is the accountability of leaders to drive within their own groups, first and foremost. Change can be an enabler to that, but they don't own culture, and they own culture change as part of working with the business to do so. But ultimately, those business stakeholders are going to listen to their leader. So it's really their accountability. When I think about the quantifiable way of taking a simple change, and I'll look at this from a banking standpoint again. Bank branches across Canada get inundated with customer requests, get inundated with notifications from corporate on things that they have to do every day, reminders of what they do, and they have multiple multifaceted jobs. And there's lots of change hitting them every day. And so you almost have to air traffic control that. And so it's taking a view as a frontlines persona and saying, in 5 years, we want this role to do this. And by taking your change plans and saying, okay, we're looking at this project, but all of the projects that are hitting that one particular role, and saying, how is that going to impact that role? And is it going to drive them to their new behaviors that the business defined, right? And you're directing, so yes, this person is going to, in the front lines, is going to be impacted by this change and this change and this change. But at some point, you have the mindset as a change leader working with the business to say, oh, we've got a view of this particular role, which is the huge population of the bank, right? And you're trying to drive that behavior with the business. Well, now you're partnering with them. You've got details and data that support that, and you're working towards a common business goal, not a project goal. You're working towards and you have data that support to say, this person has had 55 changes in the last year. And of those 55 changes, X are dealing with that persona's strategy of how they're that persona for the role and how they're supposed to transform themselves in that transformation. That's profound, because before we didn't have that. We didn't have the ability to do that. And that's where I think change and change leadership is moving towards, is you have the ability now to translate normal change management plans, which you can now aggregate up into data and say, okay, there's 50 of the 55, there's 20 projects that are critical to that role, right? And there are X amount that are low or medium. You want to focus on those highs and see how much are critical to that role. And that allows the business to understand in a way that they could never do it before, how much change is hitting them and how much of the critical stuff they're pushing through to the business is going to impact their most critical roles. When you can do that in a data set, like you got ROI that you didn't have before.
Yes, and that's really key because for leaders at the top and executives that are making some of those decisions, the more quantifiable we can make it, the more we can get buy-in from that sense. You mentioned mindset, and often the times we talk about change mindsets. What does change leadership mindset mean to you? What does that look like for you? And perhaps this is something that when you've led enterprise-wide change, when you've worked with many organizations, you've had to think about creating that change leadership mindset that you wanted your leaders to have, or you wanted your teams to have, or even across the organization. What does that mean to you when people use that term change mindset or change leadership mindset?
There's a couple of words that come to mind. It has to be something that drives accountability within the change leader. No one else is going to do it. You have to move the change yourself and then influence others to join that cause, build coalitions, get people on a journey. You have to be empathetic because you have to also realize that there's so much change going on for people, not just at leadership levels, but across the organization. And it means so many different things to different people based on how you're going. Now, hopefully you're assigned a change that is profound or critical that the business can rally around. And that's always the key thing for change leaders is you can rally people to a cause. I think that's critically important. I think whenever you can make the people feel like they're not just part of the journey, but they're helping curate it, then they're invested. And if you can create that investment, I think that's really important. So you're creating that influence and investment at different organizational layers. I think that's critical. That gets buy-in at deeper levels. And you have to be really transparent with your people. There's going to be bumps on the road to begin with. I say that at the start of any project, at any major transformation. This is going to be bumpy to start and it'll smooth out.
How can we create an organizational culture, would you say, where people see themselves as change leaders or leaders of change? So other change leadership, our ethos is everyone is a change leader, regardless of role or title, especially in today's disruptive business environment where we're going away from a lot of functional roles and we're going to where people have responsibility for delivering value and outcome. So whether you have the title as a people manager, whether you have the title as a change manager, whether you're the SME, subject matter experts implementing on a project, or you're an executive, everybody has that ability to be a change leader as a skill. How do you get people to start to see themselves as change leaders and not something to say, oh, let's assign to the change management team? They see change and they think it's somebody else's responsibility other than themselves.
You have to transform the mindsets of your people and the leaders to go away from mandate focus to purpose focus. The way to motivate an organization is not to tell them this mandate has to get done. It's just another mandate, right? But if you tell them it's leading into a purpose-driven journey for them in their career, they'll likely adopt that. It's something that drives their own purpose. And I think that's important. If you just tell somebody they're taking on another mandate, you're just adding another weight to the scale, right? But if you're getting people to say that you have a role to play in this, and it's going to be part of your role, and I know it's going to sound cliche, but if everyone doesn't lift up this, it doesn't get lifted, right? Like everyone plays a role, but it's part of their overall purpose. Shifting from, hey, I've got another mandate for you, to congratulations, you've been told to do this. And it's a selling job to your teams, right? Or to your stakeholders is to do this, it's going to require your efforts in this. And here's the rub, it's going to cause this to happen. There has to be a measure of transparency where you're going to say there is going to be an impact, there's going to be a change, it's going to create more work in the short term, but here's how it's going to benefit you. Just like you talked about what's in it for me, they've got to understand that, but it's also got to understand that it's going to enable their purpose.
I love what you're saying. It reminds me of when I go into organizations and I'm training their leaders or I'm training their teams, I say to them, this isn't a new activity for you. This is something that you're perhaps doing already. And all I'm doing in this change leadership training, it's not teaching you another framework. It's not teaching you another methodology. It's saying as part of what you do every day, how can you just be more efficient on doing it? How can you apply things like adaptive leadership? You're a leader already. You're leading change. You're doing this. How do you become more empathetic? How do you apply emotional intelligence? How do you become more agile? How do you empower others? That's why we're very focused on change leadership skills, as opposed to when people think, oh, I'm doing change management, I have to learn a new tool, I have to learn a new framework, I have to learn a new methodology or process for doing things, but helping them to understand that it's part of what you do every day. It's a mindset. It's a different way of approaching and looking at things.
We talk about how do you manage through change as a change leader, but a change leader has to be also receptive to feedback and information. And you have to be able to sometimes take that feedback and be able to say no to a change. It's too much.
Yes.
Or change leadership is also like surveying the landscape and saying, I know this is good for us, and maybe I'd still do this, but I have to remove something else off the table. I find that to be a change leader, you've got to navigate really tough waters.
Yes.
And I think if you're not a good listener to your organization and you're just saying, well, here's another change, let's do it.
Yes.
You're not a change leader. You're just doing what you're told.
Courageous change.
You have to be courageous in tough seats,
You have to be very courageous. Oh my gosh. That could be just a whole podcast.
Yeah. I think we often think about what makes a good change leader and how do they drive things forward? Well, sometimes the answer is not driving things forward. It's telling the business or telling people that you're working with to say, I don't think this is a good idea, right?
Yes.
Or our people are telling us they're cooked right now. There is burnout. That's a real thing. And that's prevalent in every organization, right? Yes. Large ones. I think it's tough. The pace of change is not moving slower. It's only increasing. The advent of AI is going to make things very transformative for how we do things.
Yes.
But I think change leadership is more key now than it ever has been.
Talking about AI, as we wrap up this discussion,
sure,
we are experiencing an unprecedented level of change right now. If it's AI,
yeah,
automation, if it's technology. And I know you've done some of this before. You spoke about robo-advisor when you did technology. There's social economic issues, geopolitical issues. There's an unprecedented level of change and amount of change that we're experiencing, disruption, uncertainty. If there was ever a time VUCA meant something, when we talk about volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, it's now. So on a personal level, bring it back to you, and even as a leader as well, how are you feeling about the current state of the world right now?
At my point in my career, depending on where you're at in your stage of career, it's going to have its ramifications and its impacts in a different way. And so for me, it proves the point that you have to be forever adaptive and nimble in your career. You can be like that at the beginning of your career, but as you move forward in your career, it's so important to maintain that muscle memory, to constantly be adaptive. We're going through a major point of transformation, as you said, politically, digitally, and where we don't yet know the full impact of that. There's a lot of ambiguity in the marketplace. Uncertainty is never a good thing for marketplaces, and that's where we're dealing with probably the highest levels of uncertainty sometimes. If I think of AI, for example, yes, there's tons of money getting paid into understanding and manipulating AI, but there's still a long road there. The good news is that people can teach themselves by just using it every day.
Yes.
And just talking to it like it's somebody in your household and say, how do I deal with this problem? And one of the things that they said is AI is going to have an impact on computer science majors, but it's also going to have an impact on English majors because it needs people that can speak the language of the AI, whatever domiciled country you're in. It's not just English, but that language. But if you are linguistically inclined, you're going to do really well with AI. But ultimately, it's going to rest on leaders and change leadership to drive these massive transformations. And until then, it's still unproven on its impact. And we've been working with automation of spreadsheets and automated manual tasks for years now. This is the next level of progression. But I think if everyone just maintains their level of adaptability, if they really converse in a way with AI in their everyday life, it's going to make it easier. If they really start thinking about how it can make them more productive. Some organizations, by the way, don't have full access to AI yet. So it's not, it's not an issue whether you're a regulated industry or not. They're getting there, but not everyone has access to it. I think we've gone through many periods, if you're my age and trying to figure out these inflection points, it's being thoughtful about what does this mean for me and the people around me? What can I do to stay ahead of the curve? Attend LinkedIn sessions on AI symposiums, just to keep you abreast of what's happening. Read about the latest transformations in the marketplace. But change leaders are going to be at the front of this. And if they're not, I don't see it being fully successful, like any transformation.
Yes, there is still so much to come, which is exciting.
It's very exciting.
And it feels scary sometimes to some people. And when you think about it, it isn't the first time. We went from horse and buggies to cars.
For sure.
We went from manually calculating numbers to calculators. And now we're just going through an unprecedented level of change. And it feels a lot right now because a lot is happening around us. And one of the things that I love you said is, as a change leader, if you're leading a team, most especially, it's about understanding that there are changes coming from different elements and hitting people differently from different angles.
Yeah.
And being able to support your team through that change. And yes, we have to get on with the change, but we also have to prioritize the change. We also have to understand that change fatigue is real. We also have to see where we're helping them embrace change. In a previous discussion I had with another guest, we said resilience is the antidote for change fatigue. We have to build that resilience for change fatigue.
Yeah.
And as we round up, one of the final questions I want to put to you is, anybody listening to our conversation today, what advice would you give to enterprise-wide executives or change leaders? What's that one takeaway you want for people who are leading change enterprise-wide?
There's still tremendous opportunity to be better change leaders. The task at hand is very challenging for enterprise leaders. The pace of change is difficult. The cost pressures of always reducing costs, of which change typically falls under, is something that has to be navigated. But think about what the organizations need. Think about speaking to them in a language that they can be spoken to and the value that they're looking for. Get into the trenches with the businesses. Figure out what they need and what partnership that they need. Start that open dialogue so you can be seen as the quote unquote trusted advisor. There is tremendous opportunity that's coming, and that will always be forever the case. But they'll always need change leaders to help them usher through this. And those change leaders have to be at the top of the house. A CEO has to start working with AI and be proficient at it before they can expect anyone else to be proficient at it. They have to do that. And that's no different. And so the higher up change leadership can be, the more profound its impacts are going to be in terms of its value.
OMG, you've raised so many great points. Being a trusted advisor, the partnership, the shared language, and change truly does come from the top, right?
It does.
So helping people have that change leadership mindset at the top will help trickle down what needs to happen across the organization. Jeff, it's been great getting to know more and having this conversation with you. And I'm sure folks can connect with you on LinkedIn. One of these years. So thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thanks, Yvonne. I appreciate it. And I welcome anyone that needs to reach out. Please do. Happy to have conversations.
Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Change Leadership Conversations. Be sure to hit the follow button, leave us a review, and share this podcast with your team or fellow change leaders, because leading change is better when we do it together.